Lord Lexden.
I beg leave to ask the question, standing in my name on the order paper.
We are now 6 weeks into talks aimed at restoring power-sharing devolved government. The issues on which the parties are focusing include language, identity and sustainability. These are complex and sensitive matters, but the parties have approached them in a spirit of engagement and with a willingness to find solutions. There remain, however, significant gaps between the parties that still need to be bridged if we are to secure an agreement.
Is it not the case that none of the parties in Northern Ireland are at the moment expressing optimism about the talks? A few days ago, the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party said, "It is time to get the political leaders together for some hard political graft." Why on earth has this not happened already? Is it because Sinn Féin are once again putting forward impossible demands instead of negotiating constructively? While the impasse drags on and on, will the government now get on and provide compensation to the victims of institutional child sex abuse in Northern Ireland? On this issue, the Northern Ireland parties are united, and the Northern Ireland office's inaction in defiance of their wishes is a complete disgrace.
My noble friend raises 2 points. The first one, I think, is important to strike the right language. This is a positive time in the talks. Progress, I believe, is being made. It would be premature of me to say that we are at the final moment, but right now the conversations are being conducted in the most positive language that we have had in some time. As to the institutional abuse question, I answered on this last week. The point I would note again is that there are a number of issues that need to be resolved as a result of the issues raised by the parties themselves. Once these have been examined, analysed and then converted into the next step, progress, I believe, will be made.
Is not the government in a hopelessly impossible dilemma? On the one hand, they are supposed to be keeping the ring at a time when Northern Ireland doesn't have a government. On the other hand, they are propped up by a small group of pro-Brexit Ulster Unionists, even though Northern Ireland voted strongly to remain. Is, therefore, the unity of the United Kingdom one of the many aspects of the catastrophes that Brexit is likely to impose on this country?
Let me be categorical in answering that. No, unity is not in question and unity is not in doubt. The matters in Northern Ireland must be resolved by the parties in Northern Ireland. Only they can reach the consensus required to deliver a sustainable executive.
My Lords, we have...
Our House recognised that the upturn in support for the alliance in the recent elections demonstrates there's a mood in Northern Ireland for reconciliation and compromise, which the political parties do need to respond to. In what way will the government be prepared to ensure that these talks continue until a conclusion is reached, bringing outside agencies if necessary, and if also legislate in this place if it can help to take pressure on some of the difficult issues? All of these things can bring a solution, and the people of Northern Ireland, I think, have expressed a wish to get a result.
No stone will be left unturned in the efforts to secure a restored executive. The talks that are going on now are conducted in the most positive of times, and it's important that during this period that we make hay while the sun shines.
My Lords, we have repeatedly raised
My Lords, one of the things delaying progress in these talks is the uncertainty about the outcome of the judge-led inquiry into the renewable heating scandal. I wonder if the noble Lord, the Minister, is in a position to give us any information as to when the judge will finally report, because I think all the parties are waiting to see what the fallout is going to be before they commit themselves further in the talks process.
The Lord raises a question to which I do not have the answer, but when I do have the answer, I will ensure that he and the rest of the House know exactly when that report will be published.
My Lords, we have repeatedly raised in your Lordship's House 2 points. First of all, could we not have the Assembly summoned? Because there is nothing to prevent the Assembly meeting without an executive, and my noble friend Lord Trimble has raised this on a number of occasions as well. And could we please have some progress on the appointment of a so-called facilitator? Because it has gone on for month after month after month. I pay tribute to my noble friend, but really speed is of the essence, and we're not having any speed.
Points, again, which he has done in the past. It is important that we stress just now that we are witnessing, I hope, a progressive step. and out of that will emerge the resolution of the issues that he so passionately cares for and which the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland also passionately cares for.
As the noble lord.
We just happen to get Stormont in the hope that the political parties in Northern Ireland can come to an agreement that allows the Assembly and the Executive to get up and running. But would the Minister agree that any agreement reached at the talks of Stormont must be a balanced and fair agreement so that both communities and every community can buy in and take ownership of that agreement? And it cannot be the situation where one side takes over.
The noble lord is absolutely right. It must be balanced, it must be fair, and importantly, it must be sustainable.
Lords, does the noble minister agree that it will be a shameful betrayal of the memory, the fine memory of Lyra McKee, if the parties, both the DUP and Sinn Féin, do not bear in mind what she stood for and reach an agreement? And in facilitating that, would he agree that the Prime Minister's, whoever that is, personal involvement, as my noble friend Lord Murphy and I have repeatedly urged, and my noble friend the Labour leader, to get directly involved and convene a summit, because that's sometimes the only way you can crack these problems?
The Lord is right to raise the sad death of Lyra McKee. I think that has added a momentum and an impetus to the talks at the moment, and it would be, I believe, a betrayal of all that she stood for if we do not finally secure a restored executive. I can assure the noble lord that the Prime Minister has taken an active interest, and even last night was in direct contact with the Taoiseach to discuss these matters, to give as best we can a favourable momentum to the talks which are ongoing.
Noble Lord the Minister, for referring to the Prime Minister, because I have to say to him, this week hasn't been an encouraging one for the NIO. It started with the NIO trying to hold an event that all MLAs refused to attend. It moved on to rumours that vital talks are going to be paused over the summer. And at the last count, we had 4 possible Conservative Prime Ministers who all think that no deal is an acceptable outcome, given the implications on Northern Ireland. Can I say to the Noble Minister, it really is essential the government engages better, the point made by the Noble Lord Lexden in his question. So can he tell us, he said the Prime Minister had a conversation with the Taoiseach last night, how many times has the current Prime Minister met with all the Northern Ireland political parties? And can he commit to doing everything he possibly can to ensure the next Prime Minister meets every party from Northern Ireland as soon as possible after they enter number 10?
The noble lady raises several points in that discussion. I think the important thing to stress here is that the resolution of this issue does not rest in London, it does rest in Belfast between those parties. The Prime Minister and the Taoiseach have sought by their various offices to engage directly with that. As to the future Prime Minister, I don't know whether he will ask my advice, but I'd be very happy to give it to him.
Baroness McIntosh of Pickering.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, the UK and the EU have agreed a deal that works for the UK's economy, security and the Union. As noble Lords will be aware, the House of Commons has rejected this deal on 3 occasions. It is now for the next Prime Minister to seek a way forward that honours the result of the 2016 referendum.
My Lords, I'm grateful to my noble friend for that reply. As he is aware, there is effectively only 3 months remaining in which to negotiate a variation of the deal that will get past the House of Commons. Will my noble friend take this opportunity to inform the House what discussions are taking place at the level of officials to see what leeway can be made at the level of political declaration? We are mindful of the fact that each of the remaining candidates are in favour of a deal, and it would be shameful if it fell through lack of time to negotiate.
Well, of course, there are always informal discussions going on. The Prime Minister is in Brussels today for the EU Council, where she will be having bilateral meetings with several other European leaders.
Various backers of Boris Johnson, such as Dominic Raab and David Davis, have backed him on the basis that we must leave the EU on October 31st. However, in the debate on Monday, the putative future Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, refused to give such an absolute guarantee. He thought that leaving on October 31st was only eminently feasible. Could the noble Lord the Minister tell us precisely what is the Brexit policy of the person who looks likely to be the next Prime Minister?
No.
I wish it was that funny. Could the noble Lord the Minister undertake to explain to Mr Johnson that if there's no deal, there will be no transition period? If he does nothing else, he will have earned his place here as a minister to take this message back, because Mr Johnson doesn't seem to understand it.
I'm fascinated by the degree to which the opposition want to comment on Conservative leadership elections. But I know it's a Liberal Democrat leadership election that nobody is commenting on at the moment. I have had discussions, as have other ministerial colleagues, with a number of the candidates, and we've had some fascinating discourse on the possible options for the new Prime Minister to take forward.
In the absence of any progress on a deal with the European Union, and concurrently the absence of any progress on the reformation of a government for Northern Ireland, when are we going to put the women of Northern Ireland out of their misery and allow our abortion laws to apply in Northern Ireland?
As the noble lady will be well aware, that this is really not a policy responsibility that I have in my department, so I think I will pass that one.
Can my noble friend tell us when the EU is going to take responsibility for half of this deal, which has been turned down, of course, by gigantic majorities in the House of Commons?
Well, I mean, as my noble friend is well aware, it was a deal that was agreed jointly between the UK government and the EU, and of course any solution will also need to be agreed jointly.
Can the Minister assure the House that Parliament will not be prorogued in order to prevent Parliament from expressing a view on the appropriate way forward before the 31st of October?
Parliament has expressed its view on these matters many times, both the other place and this House, and I'm sure both Houses will continue to express their view in the future.
The noble Lord in an earlier answer expressed some surprise at the interest that was being shown in the Conservative Party leadership. He won't be surprised, I'm sure, to learn that the interest is because this is not just an election for the Conservative Party leadership, it is an election to be the next Prime Minister. And could he therefore perhaps give a slightly better answer about what he anticipates the policy of that upcoming Prime Minister to be?
OK, I take the noble lady's point. I was being slightly facetious with my answer. Of course, there is going to be interest in what the policy of the next Prime Minister is going to be, but I don't know who that person will be yet, and therefore I don't know exactly what that policy will be.
House.
My Lords, I wonder whether there might be an opportunity for the House of Commons to give some indication of what alteration to the present agreement they are seeking, because I haven't seen yet a detailed amendment proposed in the House of Commons on the existing amendment, in the hope that some agreement might be reached for a modification of it.
Well, as always, my noble friend makes some wise points. But of course, there has been an amendment agreed in the House of Commons, the so-called Brady Amendment on alternative arrangements to ensure no hard border. That remains the one positive amendment that has been passed, indicating where support in the House of Commons might lie. But of course, we need to persuade the EU of the merits of that.
Always happy to give way to Lord Mackay of Clashfern, for whom the House has the greatest of respect. Since, however, this House, even this House, seems to be exhausted with this issue, and since discussions appear to be in limbo, What is the Minister doing with his day?
Of course, answering questions from the noble lord this morning. My time is gainfully occupied. I was in Portugal last week to sign a treaty on voting, reciprocal voting rights, to make sure that the UK citizens in Portugal and Portuguese citizens in the UK are able to participate in local elections, and we are pursuing a number of such treaties. Also, of course, we are getting on with no deal preparation because, as I've repeated many times, that remains the legal default.
Lord Berkeley of Knighton.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, we know that a rise in the value of metal may be a driver in recent increases in metal theft. We do not have specific data, however, on the theft of catalytic converters. However, recorded offences of metal theft in March 2018 are still 73% lower than was the case in March 2013. We absolutely recognise the distress, disruption and potential cost this crime can cause for victims.
I'm very grateful to the noble lady for that, since it amplifies the point I wish to elucidate, which is that we actually don't know how widespread this crime is. I should declare, my Lords, at this point, that my interest was piqued when I was, shall we say, catalytically bereaved. But actually it's no laughing matter, because it costs £2,000 to replace a converter. Some motorists have lost 2, even 3, and there's a gang going round armed with a metal bar to deter would-be people who would stop them from their malfeasance. Does the noble lady have any idea, perhaps from speaking to the motoring manufacturers, how motorists can best protect their converters, perhaps mechanically, both now with present vehicles and ones in the future?
Well, I regret the noble lord's catalytic bereavement. It sounds unpleasant. But he asks a very helpful question. I think there are 2 answers to it. The first is some of the practical advice that is already available from police forces, easily accessible online, who advise installing what's known as a Thatcham-approved alarm, which goes off if a vehicle is lifted or tilted. One can also buy protection devices for catalytic converters as a form of guard. There are marker systems, and the police obviously advise parking in a well-lit garage. In the longer term, my honourable friend, the Minister in the other place, has set up a vehicle theft task force, and they're looking at working with the motor industry and the insurance industry for longer-term solutions.
My Lords, does the Minister agree that this is a technical, not a technical or a policing issue? At its root, it is a social one, and in particular with our prison system, which is not configured or resourced to reprogram, educate and train our errant youngsters in order that they can engage exclusively in legitimate economic activity.
Well, my noble friend speaks with great knowledge about the prison system, and can I clarify, not as I understand from personal experience. And he makes a fair point that there are many reasons, and many of them social reasons, behind crime. But I think of crime types, this is one where a technical solution is relevant. Metal theft is down 73% since the Scrap Metal Act was introduced in 2013, and this is an industry where technical innovation has helped reduce crime.
Antonia Gray, Public Affairs Manager of the British Metals Recycling Agency, has said it's highly likely that these stolen catalytic converters are finding their way into the recycling system here by being taken to illegal scrap metal dealers who are openly offering to pay cash for materials. This is happening because there is now no enforcement of the law at a time when the budgets of police and local authorities have been eviscerated. Does the noble Baroness agree?
Well, I am aware, as the Noble Lord mentions, that if you go online, you can see a number of, because there is no end of research that one does in your Lordship's house to find out about these things, where there are dealers advertising cash for scrap metal. Quite often when you go into the sites, it isn't actually cash, there's actually delayed payments. So it may be that they're using it as a hook to get people in, but I think he makes a fair point. And obviously the rise in metal prices has an impact on the attractiveness of this crime type. But the Scrap Metal Act was reviewed in 2017 and found to be working well. We do believe that part of the increase in recorded metal thefts is better police recording, and I would repeat that crime overall in this area is down 73%.
My Lords, I have a question to the Government on the subject of metal theft next Wednesday, which I think will be answered by her friend Lord Henley. It's a more general question than catalytic converters. And I was interested in her figure relating to the drop in metal theft since the 2013 Act. That certainly occurred at the beginning, and one of the reasons for that was the work of the Metal Theft Task Force. However, that task force has been abandoned, and all the latest figures, and I will come to the House with some of these next week, show that since the task force was scrapped, the incidence of metal theft has gone up again. Does she agree?
I can only apologise that I'm not familiar with the details of the task force, but I absolutely agree that in the last year metal theft is up 30%. So I look forward to the Noble Lord's debate.
My Lord. Of course, my Lords, does the Noble Minister agree that until probably 3 years ago, generally crime was coming down? One of the principal reasons it was coming down was because of design. Two things have happened, which is that car design has not kept up with the thieves' ability to steal them, and sadly neither has the ability of the car manufacturers maintained the ability to stop catalytic converters being removed and still be useful as catalytic converters or perhaps as scrap metal. And surely that's where the government ought to aim its attention, and it is a long-term project because to change the type takes a while in Europe, and for the manufacturer for the lead time to change a design is also long. But I see no efforts in either car design or catalytic converter design to change that yet.
The Noble Lord is right that car theft is up about 7% in the last year, but in particular theft of cars under 1 year of age, which I think the Noble Lord is referring to, has increased over the last 5 years from a fairly steady 5 to 10% to closer to 20%. And the Vehicle Theft Task Force is going to be looking at exactly these areas, so working with the motor industry and the insurance industry to improve vehicle security standards, as the Noble Lord.
The Lord Bishop of St Albans. My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, with the leave of the House, before I respond to the Right Reverend Prelate's question, I'm sure the Chamber will join me in feeling profound regret at the recent tragic events and to note that all our thoughts are with the families of those who've been affected on our streets. The Government is taking steps to address all aspects of youth violence, from prevention to enforcement, but diverting young people away from crime is at the heart of the government's approach, and that's why we're investing over £220 million into early intervention schemes to steer children and young people away from serious violence.
My Lords, over last weekend, at least 4 people were killed through serious violence on the streets of the capital. And on Tuesday, a young person in Luton, in my own diocese, was stabbed more than 20 times. Amongst all those who are trying to work on this problem, the churches have been involved. Indeed, one of the churches has produced a statue of a public statue of a phoenix made from 500 knives, which were reclaimed through a knife amnesty, a question of turning swords into ploughshares. Would the Noble Minister, Lady the Minister, tell us whether Her Majesty's Government made any assessment of the effectiveness of weapons amnesties on reducing the number of weapons on the streets, and whether more such initiatives are being planned.
The Right Reverend Prelate paints a very powerful image of the phoenix made from knives. In relation to amnesty initiatives, individual police forces can use amnesty initiatives and surrender bins whenever they want. Those are local decisions which they can take at an operational level. Such initiatives are a key component of Operation Sceptre, and the most recent week of coordinated national action took place in March, during which time over 10,000 knives were surrendered, including in surrendered bins, and we're expecting another week of action in the autumn. But I don't think we can look at any of these initiatives in isolation. It's going to be the combination which will make a difference.
Share the Noble Lady the Minister's words on recent tragic events. In 2010, there were 3,600 Sure Start centres offering childcare and play sessions, parenting advice and employment coaching. Up to 1,000 centres have closed since then, with a cut of some 62% in council early years service spending since 2010, and the trend is continuing. Over just the 4 years to 2017-18, numbers of children using Sure Start in the 30 most deprived authorities were down by 22% and by 12% in the 30 least deprived councils. What is the government's analysis of the impact that the austerity-driven reduction over nearly 10 years in the number of Sure Start centres and the level of service they can continue to provide is now already having and will continue to have on the level of youth violence?
The government response to the Noble Lord's question is again to say, as was set out in the report of the Children's Commissioner published in February of this year, that there are many factors that influence youth violence, and actually we don't help young people if we try and pin it exclusively to one. The Noble Lord makes a fair point about changes in provision for early years, but there are also significant changes that have occurred in the drugs market which have had a significant influence. The government's focus is moving away from a purely criminal justice response to this towards a public health response and towards a long-term commitment to this area.
My Lords, youth violence people in our streets is nothing short of a national emergency and a national stain. Can my noble friend the Minister say exactly what the government is doing now to address this particular issue, particularly in relation to police visibility on our street, youth funding and school exclusions?
Well, I have with me a copy of the Hansard from Monday, where my honourable friend, the Minister in the other place, gave a list of what we're doing, and I fear time does not permit, but I can show that it's over half a column. So this really is an area where the government is doing a great deal. In relation to my noble friend's specific questions, police funding is increasing, as your lordships are aware, by over £1 billion this year, and we are aware of plans for a further 3,500 police officers and staff being recruited. In terms of youth services, I think we're particularly proud of the Youth Endowment Fund, which the government has announced, which will be delivered over 10 years. Those of us who've worked in the charity sector know how valuable 10-year funding is. In relation to school exclusions, the figures are not entirely clear about the impact of exclusions, but 21% of young people convicted of possession of a knife were excluded from school, of which 50% were after the event.
My Lords, my Lords, my Lords. My Lords, the government, I appreciate that the Noble Baroness said that the government is doing a lot, but the government's so-called serious violence strategy is actually an underfunded collection of unconnected existing initiatives and various piecemeal pots of money that have been indiscriminately thrown at the problem over recent years. When will the government take youth violence seriously by setting specific goals based on a coherent and comprehensive strategy to address both the symptoms and the causes of youth violence?
I think the Noble Lord is a little harsh, if I may. I think that the government absolutely recognises that a huge culture change is required, and that for too long the police have been the service of last resort in terms of addressing youth violence, but that will never get to the root of the problem unless we're able to engage other services, education, health, and so forth. So the Noble Lord may be aware that just 2 days ago, my Right Honourable friend, the Home Secretary, announced funding for the initial establishment of 18 violence reduction units, which I hope will produce exactly the results that the Noble Lord aspires to.